authors here. And it's funny, we have Marc Cameron, Leo Banks, and Matt Coyle here. And I was trying to come up with like a through line from all three of you guys, and I had a hard time finding one. So it should be fun to discuss them.
I think we're all kind of old.
But first of all, let me give you the official intro, taken from Marc Cameron's website, which says, author of the New York Times best-selling Jericho Quinn thriller series. Marc Cameron's short stories have appeared in the Saturday Evening Post and Boy's Life magazine. In late 2016, he was chosen to continue the Tom Clancy Jack Ryan campus thriller series. Tom Clancy Power and Empire will release today, as a matter of fact. This is the official release date. It's very exciting. Cameron's a retired Chief Deputy U.S. Marshal who spent nearly 30 years in law enforcement. His assignments have taken him from Alaska to Manhattan, Canada to Mexico, and dozens of points in between. He holds a second-degree black belt in jiu-jitsu. And is a certified scuba diver and man-tracking instructor. Originally from Texas, Cameron is an avid sailor and adventure motorcyclist. His books often feature boats and bikes, including OSI agent Jericho Quinn's beloved BMW GS adventure. Cameron lives in Alaska. Got a typo on your website. In Alaska with his wife and BMW GS. He enjoys hearing from readers. How many people are from Alaska? Happen to be from Alaska? No, not me. And then, let's see here. Next up, we have Leo Banks. His new book is called Double Wide. Terrific book, awful lot of fun. Let me see what I got here. Okay. It says, in high school, Leo Banks worked loading delivery trucks with the Sunday edition of the Boston Globe. In those days, the Sunday paper was really heavy, so he switched from lifting to writing. He graduated from Boston College and earned a master's degree from the University of Arizona, where he later taught writing. His articles have appeared in the USA Today, Newsday, Miami Herald, National Review, National Geographic Traveler, Sports Illustrated, Wall Street Journal, and many others. He's been a correspondent for the Los Angeles Times and, yes, the Boston Globe. He's written 4 books of Old West history for Arizona Highways Publishing and co-wrote a book about the Grand Canyon. His book about the saguaro cactus won't stop selling. He's won 38 statewide, regional, and national journalism awards, and today writes a column for True West magazine. Double Wide is his first novel. And Matt, I don't have the your website thing here handy, but
well, after
Matt
all that, it's
back.
short anyway. After those two guys.
Yeah.
Is this on or not? This isn't on.
Yeah, it's on.
It's on. Okay.
Matt's been here for his first 3 books. Terrific writer, one of my favorites. He's won his first book, Yesterday's Echo, won the Best First Novel Anthony Award. Let's see, he's won the Ben Franklin Silver Award for Best New Voice in Fiction, named one of 2013's Best Mysteries by Deadly Pleasures, etc., etc. And Blood Truth, which literally arrived today in the shipper. We're cutting it a little bit close. Is his 4th novel in the series. And so Barbara Peters, the owner of the store, might be swinging by. So she asked me if, because she wanted to talk to you, Marc, if I would talk to these gentlemen first and then towards the end. So what we usually do is I'll pitch a couple of introductory questions and have each of you guys talk for a little while, and then I'll open the floor up to the audience if you have questions.
The mic's not on.
My mic's not on?
It's not very loud.
It's not very loud? I'll try to project.
That's better.
Is that better? Okay. Yeah, let's start with you, Matt. Tell us a little bit, for those of the people here in the audience who haven't read any of the Rick series, can you give us just the basic setup and kind of tell us how we got to Blood Truth?
Sure. Rick is a, I'm going to call him a retired cop because he's basically kicked off the force in Santa Barbara now. I think it's been for him about 13 years, maybe from as now to when he was a cop. His wife was murdered. He was suspected for the murder, actually arrested, but never tried but never exonerated either. He's still thought to be a main suspect in that. So that kind of dark cloud follows him around. Plus, he's definitely a chip off the old block because his father before him was a cop in the town of La Jolla, which we have some La Jollans here. No, it's a fictitious police department, but I wanted to have a small insular police department where there's no oversight, where people could get away with things. Because I'm from a extended cop family, so I didn't want to have a real police force that was nasty, but La Jolla's kind of nasty. So his father had been kicked off the force 25 years plus ago from when this book starts. And Rick never knew why. His father was a man he looked up to. The whole town really did. But then he was kicked off the force, and the rumor was that he was hooked up to the mob somehow. And when Rick asked him one time as a kid, he didn't get an answer, and that was the end of that. He's not going to go any further. But his father deteriorated with alcohol and ended up dying before his time from cirrhosis of the liver. And Rick, that's another cloud that's always hung over him. And the idea of the title of the book, Blood Truth, is Rick, does he have the DNA of his father? Is he, because he's skirted some issues, skirted the law a few times in each book. And with each just bad decision he makes, he wonders if he's really, if the blood of his father is preordained his life. So when this book starts, you want me to talk a little bit when it opens up?
Yeah.
When this book opens up, Rick has been contacted by a guy who bought his childhood home, the home Rick grew up in. And there's been, I think, one other owner between his family and this guy. And the guy's, it's La Jolla, it's a tract home, so of course he's tearing it down and building it up for the view. And he finds a safe. The safe in what Rick knows how the guy described the room that was his father's den where no one was allowed. And he's found the safe in there. It was hidden behind a wall. And so that's how the story opens, although there's a little other backstory with Rick and his father. So Rick has to get the safe open, and then when he opens the safe, it leads him on a journey of finding the truth about his father.
It's funny how a lot of people think San Diego is a city that doesn't have a seedy underbelly. The boosters like to call it, the vacation spot, and very clean, and has quite the sordid history, doesn't it?
Absolutely, especially politically. I mean, at one point we were called, San Diego was called Enron by the Sea because of all the machinations with the local government and union situations. And it's beautiful. It's idyllic. I like having the juxtaposition of the beautiful environment, and a lot of my books take place in La Jolla, or have parts that take place in La Jolla, which people have never even lived there probably know of La Jolla. It's kind of like it's a wealthy spot on the coast and idyllic, and people go there to vacation, and people go there to live or have their second home. So you have a lot of influx of old money, new money, and some with no money. And I always think of if anybody saw Blue Velvet, the movie Blue Velvet with David Lynch, the director, where you got that opening scene of this beautiful lawn at night, and then underneath you see these beetles, like black, dark beetles going at it. So it's like, underneath the surface. But really, there have been a lot more people killed in my books than probably being killed in the history of the book.
There was a great image of the palm trees in Los Angeles. I forget where I saw this, but there was a rat kind of crawling up and down the palm tree.
I used to manage a restaurant in La Jolla, and Chuck's Steakhouse, and when I would go to my car at 2 in the morning after closing it down, you would see they're called roof rats, but you would see them go up, scurry up the palm trees. Yeah. And
that's why they have the tin, kind of the metal sheets around the palm trees.
Yeah. So it is really, it's a dark underbelly there.
Right. Well, Leo, how do I introduce the book? It's such a lot of fun.
I'll introduce
Wonderful. Please do.
3 decades ago, I was a newspaper reporter in Tucson, and I was single and had nothing to do. So I and I knew a guy who played professional baseball in Mexico. And I asked him to set me up with a team and a player so that I could travel with them. And I spent 3 weeks doing that, just traveling a bus around on a bus around Mexico with the Juarez Indios, which is a AAA franchise of the Mexican League. And it was a great experience, and it was a very story-rich environment, the characters that you meet, the situations that they're in. And I came back and wrote a novel about it, using the experiences, and it was called Tequila Sunday. That was the first, I guess you'd call it, iteration of Double Wide. Got an agent, couldn't sell it to save our lives, put it away. Went back to work for, I guess, 3 decades, writing for the Boston Globe and the LA Times and Arizona Highways and Sports Illustrated and all kinds of people. A couple of years ago, I went out to the garage where I keep my stuff, and I found a hard copy of Tequila Sunday, and I blew the dust off it and read it. Thought, I can do this better. So I rewrote it, and it's Double Wide now. Basically, the writing is pretty much the same. The story is very different. But I had done so much journalism in the interim around Arizona and around the Southwest that you meet a lot of people and pick up a lot of things that you can use, and everybody you meet is a potential character, so be careful what you say to me. You might wind up in the next one. And it's, learning how to write a novel is, as these guys I'm sure would agree, it's a hit and miss prospect. It takes a while to get there. It's like a skill. It's like hitting a golf ball. You just got to stand up on the tee and keep hitting the ball. And starting out, I hit a lot of balls in the water. I have 4 or 5 novels out in the garage still that I've written.
Can I borrow one?
Every now and then, I don't know if you have this experience or not. If you read your old stuff, but you go out and look at an old novel you wrote 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Oh my God, did I really write that? And some of it's not bad. Some of it's awful. But that's what you do. That's what you do.
First draft.
Yeah. And first draft, there's no such thing as writing, as rewriting. You finish one draft in 3 or 4 months, and then you go back and write it again. You write it again, and if you're doing your job, it's pretty much a different book by the time you finish than the first draft. But I also had been a baseball player as a kid and loved baseball. The basic story is a fellow who is his name is Prospero Stark. Prospero is from Shakespeare's last play, the lead character in The Tempest. His nickname is Whip, because he could throw the ball hard. He's a surefire big league pitcher as a young man. And anytime you hear that, he's gonna wash out. The bus is gonna crash and he's done. So he winds up in Mexico pitching. He's implicated in a cocaine arrest. He didn't do it. He comes back to southern Arizona. It's set in outside Tucson. Buys a trailer park in the desert outside Tucson called Double Wide. And he's going to hang out and lick his wounds and decide what to do next. And he comes home one day, and on the front steps of his Airstream trailer is a shoebox that wasn't there when he left. And inside the shoebox, he finds the severed hand of his former catcher.
In the glove or not?
No, the box wasn't big enough for the glove. So that kicks off the story. That's the first chapter. Welcome to Double Wide. So he sets out to solve the murder of his friend. It's very wild.
It's about as noir as it gets, the setup. Has either of you, or anybody in the audience for that matter, read, there was a great book called The Juke by Gary Phillips, terrific LA crime writer.
Yeah.
And it's about a kind of a washed-up football player who goes and plays for the European leagues, and things go downhill from there.
They always go downhill.
Yeah.
That's the only direction.
Right. Well, Marc, it's a treat to have you here. Tell us a little bit about how you got this great gig.
Well, I was fortunate to start going to some writers' conferences several years ago. I had already had my series going, and I met a guy named Marc, who I think maybe some of you have read his stuff, and we got to be friends over the course of several conferences. And the last maybe 2 Thriller Fests ago, he said, hey, why don't you let me do a cover blurb for your book that's coming out? And I had no idea that he was stepping away from the Tom Clancy books, but I think he was kind of testing me at the time, and so I sent him a PDF file of the final pass edits, and he read that and ended up kicking that up the chain to his editor at Putnam, Tom Colgan, and then my wife and I were on the beach in Florida doing some research for a subsequent Jericho, in fact the one that I'm trying to finish now, and my agent called and said they want you to do the next Clancy. And so I kind of hemmed and hawed, and she basically spanked me over the phone and said, "Take this job." And I really wanted to, but it's a little bit of terror, a little bit of terror involved in taking over the Clancy name, and then Marc Graney's done such a good job with the characters as well that it was kind of scary.
Now, we've talked to people that have taken over, the Robert B. Parker estate, for instance. They've had authors that have carried on the Spencer and the Jesse Stone series, and Ace Atkins and Reed Farrell Coleman. They've done a terrific job with it. And we always ask them, kind of how do you, what's the setup like there? Do you have, interaction with the estate? Is there a rule book that you have to play by? What kind of latitude do you have? What's the framework? What do you have to work with?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's pretty loose, at least with ours. I don't have to talk to anyone with the estate. I'm sure they read my drafts. I'm sure they read the synopsis that I send and give it the go or the no-go. And I've only done the one so far. I'm starting on a second one, but it went pretty smoothly. And Tom Colgan, the editor that Marc worked with and that I'm working with now with Putnam, has been doing this a long time, and so he knows the folks with the estate, and we kind of, banter back and forth about some possible plot lines, and then really he let me just run with it. So I had a lot of latitude.
Can you tell us a little bit about just the basic setup for this book?
Sure. Well, first off, I really tried hard to make sure that the characters were the same iconic characters that we grew to love and know, the Clancy characters. But what I didn't try to do is channel Tom Clancy. I had a long talk with Tom Colgan early on, the editor, and I said one of the things that really scared me is that I can't imitate Tom Clancy. Marc came very close, and he wasn't trying. They just happened to have similar styles. What I can do is I can write intricate plots. I can write action. I can draw on my experiences working with with law enforcement over the years and working with the military. I can write Clancy-esque books. I can write Marc Cameron books in the spirit of Tom Clancy, but I can't write another Tom Clancy in it, and that freed me up a little bit. So I tried to come up with characters, especially for this first book. I tried to come up with plots that would utilize the core characters: Jack Ryan, President Jack Ryan, and John Clark, who's always been a favorite of mine, and then of course Jack Ryan Jr. and then the supporting cast, Dean Chavez and those others. But really the main characters in this book are those three main ones: President Ryan, John Clark, and Jack Ryan Jr. And the three plots that seemingly don't maybe mesh at the beginning all come together at the end, and it has to do with China and some infighting in China that we don't really know what's going on. At the same time, you were talking about the seedy underbelly in different parts of the country. I did an interview with Fort Worth Star-Telegram the other day because I'm originally from Texas, and one of the human trafficking parts of the book that John Clark gets involved tracking some of these pretty bad characters down happens in some small towns in Texas. And one of the things that if I learned anything over 30 years in law enforcement, it's that San Diego, Alvarado, Texas, Scottsdale, every place has a seedy underbelly. If you get 50 people together, now maybe this is my law enforcement cynicism.
How many
but
are seedy?
50 people together, 49 of them. Well, no,
way.
two or three. We always had a saying in homicide investigations that everybody's a suspect except me, and I'm not really sure about me sometimes.
Now, Tom Clancy books, are known for their to be very dense with technical detail. Did you have to kind of bone up on some of that stuff, or do a lot of research in that department?
Sure, a lot of research, but I steered clear of the stuff that I didn't know anything about. Like Marc is, for instance, an expert in computer technology. Now, I've done some forensic computer work and really on the sideline. Generally speaking, it was some really smart deputy marshal or customs agent or something like that did the computer work, and I was kind of the knuckle dragger that went out and arrested the person after it was over. But I got to see how it was done, and so I knew the terminology. So I did some of that, but I tried to really focus on the technology that the boots on the ground people wear. For instance, one of the things, and this is a tiny little part of the book, I didn't drill way down on it, but when you watch TV or you watch the movies, or oftentimes when you read, you see those little earpieces that spies put in their ears. Now, if you were to believe Hollywood, that's all there is. There's a cool little earpiece that somehow can video, out of his, kind of see around the corner and do video and all that stuff. But what you don't realize is the person that's wearing that earpiece has a copper neck loop that they're wearing that puts a sort of some waves, similar to Bluetooth, just sort of makes a cone up by their head. You just don't see it. So there's that. It goes down to a small repeater, or not repeater, a radio pack. Sometimes they're big, sometimes they're little. Push to talk switch that might run up, all kinds of little things. So I try to just, as I described the Secret Service, as I described different military folks using drones, little things that we'd used in law enforcement, I try to put those into this particular story. So yes, I boned up on technology. I did a lot of interviews and whatnot, but I also try to maybe just be the explainer, maybe the explainer about things that we don't, like how a suppressor works. Are they really all that quiet? That sort of thing.
Well, it's funny because firearms, you hear so many crime writers say, yeah, you got to get the guns right, because if you don't, you'll hear about it, and somebody will.
Glocks don't have safeties.
Well, except the new ones do. That's the issue. No, they don't until like 6 months ago. So now when somebody goes, Glocks don't have safeties, to me as a writer, I go, well, guess what?
That's changed.
But they don't. And the new ones that the military asked for, they want to have safeties. But that's exactly right. And people that have been putting
Cordite.
Safeties on, cordite. I actually made that mistake. I used cordite back in an early book because, and they don't use that anymore. We don't use cordite anymore. That's like an old, like 19...
Just gunpowder. That's the smell. Is just
Yeah,
gunpowder.
exactly. It smells like gunpowder.
There's no
But,
chloride anymore.
right, exactly. But in the law enforcement world, we will often hear other cops say, that's the smell of cordite. So I grew up not ever bothering to read it, and then I got some nice little emails that said, we haven't used cordite since 1919 with the Boer campaigns in Africa. And I'm like, okay, all right, that's exactly true.
I put the serial number on a gun that I owned in the wrong place. Yeah, boy. Yeah. I got to look at it. I haven't seen it in a while.
Did you hear about it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh man, I got the half-life for plutonium-230 whatever wrong, and I heard from a nuclear physicist from Idaho, and I wrote him back and I said, dude, I'm just so happy that a nuclear physicist is reading a Jericho.
Tell us a little bit about the Jericho Quinn series.
Well, our actually, one of you were talking. I think you were talking about a book that you wrote that you couldn't sell, and I wrote a book about Alaskan natives and sort of a mystery that happened out in the bush. And sent it to my agent. I was writing westerns at the time, and I sent it into my agent, and she shopped it around, and I got this really nice page-and-a-half rejection letter from Random House. And I mean, most of my rejection letters were like, they got 32 of them out of a 1.5 by 11 piece of paper that, you know, they flutter out of your envelope. And so it was really nice. But one of the things it said was, who cares about Alaska? We don't care. This was pre everybody caring about Alaska. But write something over the top. Write you know, with your background. Make it more James Bond-esque. And so kind of on a lark. Our son at the time was in the Air Force Academy. I speak Japanese. Our son speaks Mandarin Chinese. I've been involved in jiu-jitsu. Our son was a boxer. I ride motorcycles. Our son wanted to be an OSI agent, Office of Special Investigations with the Air Force. And so I made this character up that rode BMW motorcycles, carried a sword behind his back, like a little sword. He speaks 5 languages, and really made it kind of like a graphic novel without the pictures. And we're on number 8, and they're doing okay because they don't take themselves really seriously. They're very plausible. They're possible plots, but not plausible
Now,
plots.
with all those very cool things that you do, are there any like nerdy things that you do as well to kind of balance that out?
This is pretty nerdy.
I write novels.
Motorcycles,
I
jiu-jitsu,
sit around and worry about whether it's who or whom or which or that, and so in court. I don't worry about it anymore. Frankly, when somebody emails me that sort of thing, I just mea culpa, and because with you guys know, when you write 105,000 words, or with a Clancy 150,000 words, or even 90,000 words, you're going to make some mistakes. Sometimes the mistakes are like my website from the Alaska. During the Clancy book, we had 5, 6, 7 editors, and then they gave it to a cold read editor at the end. And there was still this little fragment of a sentence that no one caught. It's not in the book, because at the last minute I was like, okay, I think I'm all done here. Oh my gosh, and I sent it back to Tom Colgan, and he was all of us were like, we were just blind to it. So there's going to be errors.
You know, speaking of mistakes by writers, there are mistakes by editors too. You mentioned Who Cares About Alaska? Tony Hillerman, right, the Joe Lee Porn mysteries.
Love Tony.
He got rejected early on by an editor who said, you got to get rid of all these Indians.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Seems pretty good, but get rid of the Indians.
Yeah.
Right.
I just want to say to his website, I think it wasn't a mistake, the Alaska.
The Alaska.
It's like the University of Ohio State, when the Ohio State. The Alaska.
That's right.
There's only one.
Right. Now, Leo, I wanted to ask you a little bit. Being not technically from Arizona, I came here when I was 3, but you do such a wonderful job of evoking the state in all its contradictory glory. You know, the beauty of the landscape and the kind of the seedy trailer park underbelly and the I don't know. I just wanted to pay you that compliment.
Thanks. Well, I wrote for 20 years for Arizona Highways magazine, and in fact, I wrote more stories for Arizona Highways than anybody in the magazine's history.
Really?
Since 1925, more than 300 bylines. And one thing I figured out about Arizona is it's unbelievable when you get off the highways.
Yep.
And you get into the canyons and the mountains and some of these towns and the people you meet. It's a great place. There's a lot here. And there's a lot that most people in Phoenix and Tucson and the developed areas don't know about.
We call it the Arizona.
The Arizona outback. Well, you were talking about motorcycles. Arizona is a great motorcycle state. I mean, there's so many wonderful 2-lane roads, that go off into all these fascinating places. Yeah.
And people in those places read. People you get on some of these ranches in southern Arizona, anywhere in Arizona, people read. A lot of readers.
And you have to go outside.
You have to go outside, and you can't get cable, or maybe you couldn't. I don't know, you probably can now. Years ago you couldn't, so you read. They're literate people that like stories, and it's great to meet them.
There she goes.
Sorry, everybody. Hi. It's very nice to see you all. Hi there, Matt. I don't want to interrupt the flow.
Not too Leo, so has this kind of what's next? Are you gonna follow
Part
the-
2, number 2.
Number 2.
Same,
All right.
same character, Prospero Stark. Some of the same people who populate his trailer park, and there's going to be a lot of bodies in the desert.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, this is
I can't be
fascinating.
responsible for what happens.
Fascinating state. I mean, crazy political stuff.
It's-
Obviously, the border.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, this is a very story-rich environment. Arizona is.
we were the kidnapping capital of the world for a while there.
Really?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
heard that.
yeah, absolutely.
And an old mafia capital, for sure.
Huge. Yeah,
You can still eat at Duran's.
God love them.
yeah. Well, yeah, we were talking a little bit about kind of the underbelly of places like San Diego that people don't associate with underbellies.
Well, I just want to say that I'm doing my research right now about the underbelly of Arizona.
Yeah,
I'm staying in a Super 8.
be careful.
Is it on Van Buren?
Pardon, no.
You're okay.
I'm not gonna
Well,
give it up.
Yeah, with La Jolla, you mentioned. You know, Raymond Chandler, a big icon of mystery fiction and crime fiction. You know, famously lived there for a while. He lived all over
last
the
years of
place.
his life, yeah.
But I kind of wanted to pitch this at all three of you guys. But starting with you, was Chandler a big influence on you? I can't
Me?
imagine it
Or
wasn't. Or Matt.
Yeah, he was actually. I read Chandler when I was probably 12 years old, and you know, he only wrote 7 books, and he wrote a lot of short stories. But my dad gave me The Simple Art of Murder, I think, when I was 12 or 14, and that's what kind of got me into it. And yeah, that was my first major influence for sure.
Chandler?
I did see his house before. I saw his house down in Bird Rock and in part of La Jolla, and then somebody bought it, and then they raised it and built up some other house that doesn't have a bullet hole in the wall anymore.
You're kidding.
Yeah, but they sold it for $4 million. So
There are a few writers that make you want to turn off the computer and never do it again. He's one of them because you can't do it as well. And he couldn't plot his way out of. His plots were awful.
didn't matter.
Right.
Didn't matter. His facility with the language, his ability to use the language was magical. You know, a blonde to make a bishop kick in a stained glass window, things like that. I mean, you can't make that stuff up.
Well, he did.
But he did. I can't, but he did. When I was traveling in Mexico, which was the inspiration for Double Wide, in fact, I wrote about this on Brash Books blog about the origin of Double Wide and how it came to be. I said that when I was traveling, I could forget everything, forget to pack everything. But I was all right if I had apples, clean underwear, and a Raymond Chandler paperback. And that's the truth. It was just awesome.
Who else influenced you guys?
Well, I like James M. Cain, David Goodis, Cornell Woolrich. Contemporary, I like George Pelicanos, Robert Grace, Matt Coyle.
Ah,
Some money is changing hands.
very little.
I like a book called Dodgers by Bill Beverly,
Great.
run LA Times
Somebody else was just telling me about that.
Book
Yeah.
Award.
That's good.
I like Bull Mountain by Brian Panowich. He's a firefighter in Georgia, and it's a story of a generational crime family. They start out running Shine, then they run marijuana, and now they're into meth. And they're as brutal as the mafia, but one of them becomes a deputy sheriff, so you have the deputy sheriff going after his own family. It's a beautiful book.
It's a classic American story.
It's a Christmas story.
The feel good.
The Waltons kind of.
Yeah.
What about you, Mark? Who were some of your influences? Was Clancy one when you were coming up?
Yeah, Tom Clancy, Without Remorse was probably my favorite one because I was such a rule keeper kind of a guy, and John Clark was not, and it was kind of fun to get a little escapism going on. I read a lot of read some Raymond Chandler. In fact, Raymond Chandler, John D. MacDonald, those and Ian Fleming were the three writers that when I was younger I would write. Before we even knew what fan fiction was, I would try to imitate the plots and the styles and kind of rewrite their plots with, or maybe put in my stories some of their kind of words and flow of language, and just sort of play with the word. You asked me if I did anything nerdy. That's kind kind of like Scrooge McDuck plays with coins. I just like to play with words and write things down and sort of try to mimic those particular writers. Carl Hyacin, I really like that quirky. I believe in a lot of humor. I really think that from well, it was probably with sports and from a law enforcement, at least a extended law enforcement family, you learn that. And our youngest son is a police officer in Anchorage right now, and one of the first things he told me, he called me when he was still on field training, and he said, "Dad, why did you not tell me that intestines look like bubble gum?" And I said, "Son, it didn't come up at dinner. When you were little, I meant to tell you that." But he's learned that that's the way we kind of let off steam. That's the way when you've seen something really horrible happen, whether it's your, in the military, your buddy getting shot, or whether it's or somebody that you've had to hurt, or in law enforcement, some of the tragic stuff that we've seen, we have to have that macabre gallows humor, and it can be off-putting to some people. Our son's married to a nurse, which makes it much easier for him because they have the same sort of thing. So I really, Carl Hyacin, I really like his writing because I know those people. One of the first books I ever read by him was called Storm of the Century, about basically Hurricane Andrew, and they sent about 300 deputy marshals to Florida right after Hurricane Andrew, and we were the law in Florida City and Homestead, and lots of really tragic and super funny stuff happened. And he really picked up on that.
Right. Now, Barbara, just to kind of clue you in, I just asked Marc a little bit about our standard question for people who are taking off and continuing these iconic series. But I wanted to ask you about you said there wasn't really a Bible that you had to play with or work off of, but do you have latitude to change backstory at all? I imagine you probably don't.
No. I think the thing with 18 books before mine, and with so many writers, some of the backstory can get a little gray. But Marc Graney's been an incredible help. Mike Madden wrote the summer book before mine, and Mike put together a really nice little, as he was researching his, he kind of got a 6-month head start on me. And so Marc put together a little Bible, if you will. But then my wife and I went just sort of unplugged from the rest of the world and went to a little island south of the equator with a bunch of books on our Kindle and and softcover books, and just read and put together our own little Bible of the characters that I was going to be using, and so that we were, because believe me, you'd hear from it. I mean, if it's the wrong kind of whiskey that so and so drinks, you hear about it.
Right. Now, will a future Clancy book have some Alaska-themed issues, possibly?
I don't know.
Is that
I don't know.
something you can do?
Sure. Part of the reason I've steered clear of Alaska over most of my books. In fact, the 7th Jericho Quinn book is the first one where I really had much going on in Alaska, is because of my former job. I was part of Joint Terrorism Task Force. I was part of the, read into some things that I don't want to go to prison, and so I didn't. I kind of steered clear of them. Now that I've been retired for 6 years, a lot of those things are stale, and so I can write about things that are more interesting without accidentally, stepping over the line. So, but who knows? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes on with Alaska because I don't know if you guys know this, but Russia is very close to us. And,
I'm going to make it. No, I'm not going to make a joke about seeing it up.
So there, it's especially the quirky people that run to the end of the end. They think that they're going to get away, and so they run to Alaska and then stick out like crazy. I mean, you don't run to in Upac Village up Caribou Poop Pass up in the Brooks Range and blend in. You just don't.
Right. Just quickly, then I'll open it up to questions. But Matt, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your sordid past as a a seller of sports memorabilia, and if that, as a subject, could make its way into a crime novel.
Yeah, these guys will haven't lived until I've lived in my shoes, Marc's got the jiu-jitsu background and everything. I own a dog. But, no, actually, it's sports collectibles. I don't even want to get into the difference because nobody cares. No, there are some people I like to kill, but in management, upper management. But no, people have asked me that, and no.
In a word.
No, I mean, no.
Well, does anybody have questions they'd like to ask?
If I do.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. Anybody else? You want to take over for a
Sure.
while?
I will for a minute. Thank you.
You bet.
I actually left Alaska and I can Dana Stabenow home taking care of my husband and his shoulder replacement. So he can't do anything because it's his right arm and he can't drive and I'm going to kill him. I really am. Or Dana arrived from Homer just in time. So anyway, I did have a question since Patrick asked you more of the standard question, but it's something that's come up when talking to Ace Atkins and Reed Farrell Coleman. Did you already cover this? If you did, stop me. But I'm always curious about how you're going to take something that, has a universe and it was part of a time that we have now moved forward from, and how you can move him forward in a way that makes him relevant now without contradicting the things that are already in place.
That's really a good question, because that's something that I struggled with really hard in the beginning, and because they're older, they're, President Ryan's been the president for 21 years now or something like that.
Totally unconstitutional. Right.
But that's a literary fiat that we just sort of accept, because he's the president. That's where the action is, right? You can't go anywhere from there. But it's interesting you say relevant, because as I get older, my son, the police officer, the other day, I was telling my friend here, I was talking to my son, and he's Vicky, what is he, 26? 26-year-old son, and he grew up, so for 30 years of his life. In fact, he was born while I was in the Marshal Service Academy. I was running on what they call a fun run for 12 miles, or actually that's an exaggeration, 10 point something miles, and the little limo pulled up next to me and said, fall out, we're having a baby. And they took me and let me call my wife, and then took me back and finished the run after. So he's grown up in a law enforcement family, and I said, hey, I want to come do a ride along with you. Let me come do a ride along. I think it'd be interesting with Anchorage Police, and because I know a lot of those guys. And he said, Dad, it's kind of dangerous. And it really sort of gutted me. And so I thought, what this guy Clark, who I have grown up with basically, John Clark, who's this tough as a boot. Now he's a grandpa. He's got daughter. In some of the books he's got daughters. But we only talk about one anymore. What's going through his mind while he's doing this real kick-butt stuff? And I realized, trying to put myself in his shoes, that what is really bothering him is remaining relevant. He is, in fact, he shoots all the time. He's got a firing range in his back. He sees these kids in this book that are being brutalized and trafficked, and he just wants to stay relevant. He wants to stay part of that fight. And so, really, if there was any kind of a theme to this book, obviously the President of the United States is relevant because of his job, but it's Clark who takes up a good half the book, trying to figure out where he's at as an old guy. I mean, how many of you have read Without Remorse? Anybody? And Without Remorse, he kills a guy with a hyperbaric chamber, right? And if you look at Facebook today, you'll see that, I won't give it away, but you'll see a picture of me standing by an industrial incinerator, and you can draw that inference however you want, right? So he's doing all this kind of stuff, but at the same time, he realizes that he cries when his grandson catches a pop fly and stuff that I'm 55, and I was never a crier. But now, I think, wow, my daughter's boyfriend sure is nice. So that's kind of where I'm at with the book. And fun because it's still a kick-tail kind of a thriller, but it's fun to see these really tough men and women be the kind of human that I'm learning how to be, I suppose.
So we've had Marc Rainey here for several times, and he's coming back in February with The Gray Man, and he's not writing Clancy now. He's focusing on that. Are you and Mike Madden going to be taking turns here?
Yes.
Which is pretty unique. So it'll be every 6 months.
Right. Mike does the summer Jack Ryan Jr. campus books,
Right.
and I'll do the winter Jack Ryan Sr.
So it's kind of got two lives of its own anyway. I think that's so fascinating, that these fictional characters can live on as interpreted by other people and evolve. And it's a subject that comes up among other authors, How is it, you guys, are writing in your own universe, right? So you haven't had to accommodate yourself to someone else's. But I think there's a really extra challenge in there. You have to be true to what was created, but you also have to be true to yourself.
True, and you want to write. I don't want to mess up anything that Marc started too. Some of the characters that are in the newer books he's developed,
Right.
And so I want to make sure that I continue on. I ghost wrote for another author years ago,
Yeah.
Westerns, and it used to bug me when I'd write a new character and then the next ghostwriter would kill him off, and I thought, why are you doing that right away? Let him. I had dreams. He has hopes. And so I know that Marc was. He posted on Twitter or something. I'm really worried about one of the characters.
Yeah.
So
So you're all really populating a universe, with your own people, and as long as you bring in new people, they don't actually have to be true to Clancy, right? Because
Right.
they didn't exist in
Right.
this universe.
yeah, they have to be true to the spirit of Clancy, but yeah, you're right. We most of the characters are old Clancy characters, but there are some that Marc created and Grant created, and now one or two or three that I created that will probably continue on.
Did we mention that this is the publication date?
Sure did. Yeah.
Excellent. So that's really exciting. And I got an email from Marc saying he was flying down from Alaska, and so I hope that we've given you a warm welcome.
Oh, this is great. This is awesome. Meeting these guys. I've lived in many double wides. I want to go read a double
Right.
wide.
Do you know that Putnam has another U.S. Marshal still active writing thrillers who lives here? And I'm looking around to see where is he, because he is not here.
Must be a good job.
He's a U.S. Marshal that writes for Putnam?
Yeah.
J. Todd Scott.
Jay Scott.
No, J. Todd Scott is
J.
on.
Todd
He'll have
Scott.
a new book out in March, but
And he's the Deputy United States Marshal?
yeah, and still serving, which I find really fascinating.
I do too,
So,
because I had to retire. No, I wrote several before I retired, but the Department of Justice took a kind of a... I was grandfathered in, shall we say, so I suppose J.
Okay.
Todd Scott. I'd like to meet him.
And do you know that John Sanford, yet another Putnam author, has moved his guy, Lucas Davenport, into the U.S. Marshal Service so he doesn't have to stay in Minnesota. All of a sudden, the U.S. Marshals are really hot,
Well,
guys.
what's
amazing.
interesting is we had so many people that would pretend to be Deputy United States
Oh, yeah?
Marshals. And I had a buddy of mine with the Bureau. He said, why did anybody ever pretend to be FBI? And I said, come on. He goes, yeah, you're right.
Is it, or he is DEA. I lied. Yeah, you're absolutely right. He is DEA.
Oh, okay.
He's not a marshal. Right. And we recently had a huge expose in the Arizona Republic about the Witness Protection Program and
Marshals.
U.S. Marshals and the Mafia alive and well again in Phoenix. And did you all read that? I thought it was a fascinating article by Robert Englund. And John Dalton has just written a book, which we're going to publish in May, about the Don Bowles murder and the huge presence of Mafia figures here in Phoenix, in which he actually calls out Barry Goldwater and Harry Rosenzweig by name in the book. I had to think about it as our modest legal department. And the good news is you can't libel or slander the dead. So,
That's right. That's
so
right.
I know, but I actually got a legal opinion just to make absolutely sure I could remember. It's been a long time since law school. Anyway, there's a lot of interesting stuff to write about. So maybe next time you're here, we can get Scott to
That would
come
be-
over from the DEA, and you
that would
guys
be
could have a
cool.
talk about government service and
We-
why it leads to a life of writing crime fiction.
We actually have kind of a little subgroup at BoucherCon and Thriller Fest that are starting to, the former RCMP and
Yeah.
different law enforcement folks that are sort of glomming together. I think we, maybe like
Yeah, Jim Boyd from
magnets.
Florida, I
Yeah,
think, is
yeah,
part of
yeah.
that also. Right.
So can I just ask one question to
You
the
can.
audience? So I always, when I'm doing a little event or something like this, I always bring a marshal's badge. And anybody that knows when the marshal service was created gets this badge. Anybody?
Google.
Anybody? You have phones?
No, it's cheating if you get out your
What's the
phone.
name? What's the name? Who played Cahill, U.S. Marshal? Oh my gosh. What?
Don Wayne.
I got-
You get it.
the badge.
Okay, there you are. Well, that's a very nice
Yeah,
giveaway.
I do.
I'll
I do.
deliver.
1789. This is one reason why a lot of people they just sort of, their de facto, their go-to agency is the
Yeah,
Marshal
I'm not-
Service
I'm
because
not-
it's the oldest one.
Yeah, I'm not sure Steve Berry didn't actually mention that in his book about the secret society and the last.
Probably,
I'll bet he did. And I
probably
should
it was the
know
one
that.
that we protected the president.
Yeah.
We hunted counterfeiters. And I think a bunch of them just got drunk, and so they had to steal those jobs away and make the Secret Service and other things.
Well, if nothing else, this evening should have convinced you all that crime fiction is ever evolving. And one of the reasons I love it is that it does stay up with contemporary society and social issues and stuff that's going on in a way that's a lot more fun than getting yourself depressed reading the paper. Sometimes good prevails, right? So,
Very good.
anyway, you all mentioned your next book. Have all of you had a moment to say what you're writing next?
I have, and it's called Champagne Cowboys.
Oh, this is the one with all the bodies in the desert.
I'm afraid so.
Perfect. All right,
Yeah.
Matt, what are you doing over there? You
Finishing
San
up
Diego?
book 5 in the Rick Cahill crime series. Speaking of Cahill, don't have a title for it yet because it's still a mess that has to be revised heavily.
Okay, well, it's good enough.
Yeah,
And
next
we've
summer,
already
though.
heard that you're doing another Clancy book.
I have another Clancy book that I'm going to start in January, but
Okay.
I have a
Another
new
book of
series.
your own?
I'm finishing up with Jericho Quinn now, but I have a book that I've already turned in that will be out in probably September, but it's a brand new series about a
exciting.
deputy marshal in Alaska.
Who's going to be publishing that?
Kensington.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
All right. So we have plenty of opportunities to see you.
yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Great. Does anybody have a question now that they would like to ask since I usurped the question time? And if not, would you like to thank our authors for coming to join us this evening? Thank you.
Just, you're not going to kill off any characters, are you? Grant Black, I think Grant Black, we killed off 2.
Oh no.
Clancy characters.
No, who
hate
knows
that.
3 or 4 down the road, but right now I'm more of a protector than a killer. If I kill somebody, it'll be somebody that I conceive right now. At least with the next book. I can't say anything after that. But right now, if I kill off anybody, it'll be somebody that you meet.
Your Jericho Quinn books, the characters are so colorful.
Oh, thank
They're
you.
so interesting.
Thank you
And
very much.
I like the humor. The
Thank you.
humor, in it, especially the Cajun's wife,
Oh, yeah.
how she
Yeah.
beat that guy.
Yeah, you can probably hang around my wife for 5 minutes and you'll know where I get that. Yeah.
Well, I'd also like to give a shout out to Patrick for hosting the event this evening because I'm sure it was wonderful. He always studies up and has intelligent questions instead of me who comes down here and wings it. So our style is really different, but we always have a great time. I'm going to ask the authors to go over there. If you guys would all rise from those 3 chairs and sit around, and you're welcome.